Jedi Academy.
Yeah, Dasan seemed obsessed with it.
Oh no.
Gather round, kids. Star Wars games existed in a primordial state in the 80s. Star Wars was a hot property, but licensed games mostly consisted of just reskins of normal, really basic video game premises. They didn't really try telling their own stories or doing anything too adventurous. And then Doom happened in 1993, and then Doom 2 happened in 1994. And then LucasArts went out and made their own version of Doom, Dark Forces. Instead of being a straight adaptation of the movies, Dark Forces was a new story about new characters. It was also developed by LucasArts directly instead of the traditional relationship of LucasArts licensing the games out to other developers. LA had started making games in the late 80s, but hadn't actually tried their hands at Star Wars until X-Wing, the game. But even that had been inspired by Wing Commander. Still, being a clone isn't a bad thing when the thing you're cloning is good, and Doom 2 is a good formula to emulate. LucasArts would go on to develop a sequel, Dark Forces 2. Wait, no, Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, because now there's lightsabers and force powers. At the same time, Raven Software was working on games like Heretic, Hexen, and most importantly, Heretic 2 and Star Trek Voyager Elite Force. This is important because when George Lucas started working on the prequel trilogy, LucasArts' attention was taken away from the first-party development, and they had to go back to licensing games out to other developers. Thus, a match made in heaven. Raven Software was contracted to create Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, and its sequel, Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy. This naming scheme is convoluted, so it's more appropriate to refer to the LucasArts games as Dark Forces and the Raven games as Jedi Knight. Heretic 2 laid out the gameplay formula, and Elite Force proved that Raven could do good work on a licensed franchise in id Tech 3, which was impressive because Star Trek and video games have a tenuous relationship at best. Raven's Jedi Knight games have long been hailed as having the best lightsaber combat ever devised in a Star Wars game, at least for official license titles, because there's always the Outer Rim. Yet we start the game, arriving on Kejim, max difficulty with no lightsaber and no force powers. At this point, someone will probably have already recommended you use these cheats to get the goods, but hold your horses. Having these tools now breaks these levels, which is a shame because they're really good first-person shooter levels. They're full of moments where you unlock a door and arrive at areas you've already been to. It's this complex maze you go through, like an actual military facility. We contrast this with the average Academy level, which is a linear series of hallways and combat arenas. The Jedi Outcast levels hinge on you gradually expanding the areas you can go to as you clear the map out of enemies. It's a really clever and genuinely impressive design from Raven. After 2 levels on Kejim, we head to Artus Prime. Level 3 has us going through a mining facility and it kinda drags, but level 4, a prison break, taking one of the officers hostage, and it's got that element of reusing the same general areas intelligently. Then we battle to help liberate all these prisoners in a big open area. But what is the context? We play as Kyle Katarn, MF. It's post-Return of the Jedi, so basically during the same time frame as The Mandalorian. We're sent to investigate some Imperial Remnant lads at Kejim. Turns out they're doing something weird with these crystals, so we go to Artus where prisoners are being forced to mine them. At the end of Artus, Jan gets captured by a dinosaur and a fetishist before getting killed off screen. Kyle, mad about losing his girlfriend, goes to the Valley of the Jedi. This is basically the only connection these games have to Dark Forces, and it's not hard to follow. Anyways, Kyle uses the power to regain his lost force powers, and he heads to the Jedi Academy to get his lightsaber. Luke Skywalker has us perform a short force power tutorial, and we're off to the game proper as some people just skip straight to the first level of Nar Shaddaa, which has 2 different pronunciations before you say anything.
He claims to be an honest garbage hauler, but he's really one of the most powerful criminal kingpins in all of Nar Shaddaa.
Take one of the Academy's vessels to Nar Shaddaa. It'll be less conspicuous.
The plot of these games is really just context for why we visit the levels. The Academy drops this linear story structure for a more open-ended mission-based structure anyways, so the story doesn't really matter, and I played Outcast more as a confused man's bizarre adventure through an alien world. Nar Shaddaa is where we're first given a chance to use the lightsaber, but not immediately. We have to go to a bar first to ask about the location of the local gangster. Our guns are taken, but not our lightsaber, and we're allowed in. How is the gunplay in these games? Well, it's got one big problem, and that's the crosshair. It doesn't exactly align with where your shots will go, which is understandably an issue. The other problem is that until you get the lightsaber, you only get access to 7 weapons. The almost useless stun prod, Kyle's blaster, the E11, the bowcaster, grenades, trip mines, and det packs. So really only 3 weapons. The blaster is accurate but slow to use, the E11 is inaccurate, and the bowcaster usually has a limited supply of ammo. This is the gunplay for the first 2 hours.
Who's there? We got him. To my team.
I have a sneaking suspicion the E11 was made intentionally garbage so that the stormtroopers using them would be more inaccurate. Because Nar Shaddaa shows full well enemies using better guns are way more accurate. And sure, each gun has an alternative fire. You can charge the blaster to do more damage, albeit not much. You can rapid fire the E11 if the enemy's getting close, and you can rapid fire the bowcaster or charge it to do a fanning shot. But even with that, Outcast is kind of barren, which is bizarre because this game has enemy variety and gun variety. We've only seen half the weapons before we get the lightsaber, even though by that point most people just switch to almost exclusively using said lightsaber. There's a sniper rifle, a rapid-fire machine gun with a grenade launcher, a gun that shoots electricity and kills droids quickly, a shotgun with a grenade launcher, and a rocket launcher. And we start seeing enemies that use more than just the generic blaster and E11. Sniper guys that throw grenades, guys that use the bowcaster, guys that use the machine gun, and among them are regular guys that still use the E11. Nar Shaddaa really opens things up in terms of combat, which is one of the few things these levels have going for them. But again, most people just switch to strictly the lightsaber at this point, which is a shame because even after you get force powers, these games are fun to play as first-person shooters with magic. Our first level here is a sniper alley. This is the tail end of that era where level designers would be pricks and put 5 hit scan snipers to sap 80% of your health in half a second, or worse in Halo 2, which is a shame because this level also has a lot of verticality to complement our new jump height. Then we get into the garbage processing facility, and this is where most people need to walk through because, well, follow the logic. First, and this is very important, you need to jump up into one of the 4 trash compacting machines to enter a room with a bottomless pit and endlessly high stacked boxes. What? You fight through this area and, very important, come to this hallway and pull this dumpster back. It's very important that you do this now. The clue was this dumpster you might accidentally pull near the start of the level. So you backtrack through all that, go back through the compacting machine, and then continue exploring the level confused as to where to go. You might reach this room where you shoot an explosive box to open up an area, but no, that's not progress, that's a dead end. Instead, you're supposed to figure out that you need to pull this box away from the wall, go into the vent behind that box, and then go down this hallway. Remember the dumpster? This is where it's important. If you didn't pull it earlier, you can't progress past this point. You push a second dumpster and then go to the rest of the level. If you didn't pull the first dumpster back earlier, you need to backtrack all the way over there, which may be your second time if you did happen to go over there but didn't think to force pull a dumpster. All you have to do is add a shortcut to get to the first dumpster so I don't have to go through the compactor multiple times, and I would abstain from having level progress be hidden behind a box that looks like a static prop. It does not stop there. We free a prisoner, who happens to be Lando. He's actually being proactive in investigating a gangstar that infiltrated his community, and not just hanging out on some desert world. Yeah, this is clearly the inferior canon. So we go with him to his ship, and he's got 3 things he needs us to do. First, we need to open the hangar doors, then refuel the ship, and then open the actual hangar doors. The first doors are just so we can get inside. But there are people-sized doors that the enemy uses during a forced escort section where Lando can and will get killed. I hope opening the giant door doesn't come back to bite us in a minute. Okay, opening the real hangar doors is simple. Find this grate, crawl through a vent, and then clear this room out and press 5 buttons. I don't know why there are 5 buttons to do this one action, or why the level designer decided that this would only open half of the hangar door. Then we head back to the hangar and have to intuit to destroy these boxes and repeat the 5 button dance to open the other half. Finally, refueling the ship. So we find what looks like a refueling station, but it's got symbols on it. So do these things, but they're red herrings. I mean, I get it. I'm supposed to look at the valve that's actually connected to the ship, but what reason would you have to put the same symbols on irrelevant tanks that actually catch the player's eyes, than to simply force the player through needless backtracking? Finally, we're geared to leave, but we have a main turret to fight the big boy who's destroying the ship, which is apparently made out of cardboard because normal guns are doing significant damage to it in addition to the gun turret. I swear, this is not how the game normally is. Nar Shaddaa is just full of an unusual level of dickishness. So we arrive at Cloud City, and your first time you'll be flung to your death of being crushed by pressure of a gas giant because there's an elevator that pushes out air through the vent, which will throw you. No warning from Lando about this feature either. Okay, now the dickishness is mostly over. We fight our way up through the lower levels of Cloud City, which is no problem after Nar Shaddaa. You do have this weird instance of game logic where the only way to progress through this facility is an elevator that's located on the other side of a flamethrower, or the giant death chasms that you have to run across on lasers, or the big room you navigate by riding air currents. The funniest part is the people stranded in the middle of all this, because how does a normal person without a jetpack or force powers get around this area? Speaking of, this is also where the game introduces enemies with force powers and lightsabers. Lightsaber combat in these games is pure chaos, and that's without turning on the extra variables. By default, you can survive getting cut with a lightsaber, but most people consider G-Saber realistic combat essential for the experience, which makes the lightsabers more realistic by making getting touched by one a death sentence. Which makes the combat more chaotic because now you can just die instantly. Same for the enemies. Which begs the question, if most people use purely the lightsaber with realistic saber combat and full dismemberment, which mildly invalidates the challenge of the game, then is the lightsaber combat actually good, or is it just cathartic? I know that might sound like high heresy because Raven's Jedi Knight games have been heralded as having the best lightsaber combat, but this is hardly graceful or deliberate. Basically, the way it works is that your movement direction at the time of swinging dictates your swing direction. So forward and back is vertical, side to side are horizontal, diagonals are, well, diagonal. And there is camera control, so your speed swing can be accelerated or decelerated by moving the camera faster or slower. Now, that's all well and good, but swinging wildly will also just get the job done. Because unless you're in the competitive space of Star Wars Movie Battles 2 dual servers, there isn't really an incentive to learn the minutiae of this combat. It has the classic fighting game problem where spamming the buttons can be just as effective as deliberate technique. That's not to say it isn't fun, most cathartic power fantasies are, but it's kind of the reason I don't advocate people play these games with realistic saber combat, because it takes away any incentive to try and learn. A fun way I play the game is to be Kyle Katarn, a force-powered gunslinger who only pulls out the saber for duels. Or you can try playing the game using only the lightsaber, no sniper rifle or rocket launcher. Anyways, I'm not going to do a level-by-level synopsis for the rest of Outcast, mostly because they are fairly good levels and there isn't much to point out and make fun of like with Nar Shaddaa. Katarn gets up to the top of Cloud City to find the fetishist, Tavion, who he duels, and she eventually lets slip that Jan's death was faked, because why would they risk killing one of the two people who had the information they needed? That's surprisingly smart. The villains didn't actually know if Katarn would go straight to the valley, so they just suspected he would and happened to be right. We head out to a space station where the ship that Jan is prisoner aboard is docked. The only thing to complain about here is this stealth sequence, which is really out of place considering Katarn has just spent hours prior cutting a swath through the ship. Kyle says there are too many stormtroopers for him to take, but I don't believe him. We fight the local admiral in a power suit, rescue our girlfriend, escape down to a planet that the Imperials are invading, which happens to be Yavin, duel the dinosaur, and save the day. I mostly wanted to get the good parts over with because I want to talk about Academy.
It could be a trap. I mean, well, why would you be?
It could be, but I'm not willing to let him die there if it isn't.
You already have a lightsaber, so you're probably way ahead of me. I'm Rosh, by the way.
Unlike Outcast, Academy immediately starts the player with a custom character and lightsaber, because Raven knows what most people are here for is the Jedi power fantasy stuff, which isn't very Jedi-like. En route to Yavin, our transport gets shot down and we have a small tutorial in a jungle with these weird shrieking monsters that don't show up later. This mostly just seems to be a plot introduction more than a tutorial, and we get a short tutorial after introducing the lightsaber and force powers. Again. The long and short of it is that Luke Skywalker is a wise master who's recruited a fresh crop of Padawans, clearly the inferior canon. Kyle Katarn's now also a master, ours in fact, and we're friends with Rosh, another apprentice of Kyle. I use the term friends loosely.
Truth is, I'm a little nervous. I've never done anything like this before. I hope you don't mind if I walk up with you? Hey, don't tell Isran I was afraid to meet him by myself. Not the best first impression for a new vampire hunter, I guess?
Everywhere I go, I'm reminded of Elder Scrolls. Rosh is a dick and uses a training droid to slow us down, but still somehow almost loses what wasn't even a race. Yeah, he'll totally make a great Jedi.
With all the Jedi in the jungle, it was almost too easy.
Excellent.
Oh, hold on, gotta download Open Jedi Knight real quick. Turns out these games are really buggy these days. Didn't used to have these issues until I, quote, upgraded, unquote, to Windows 10. Same thing for Battlefront 2. Most of the bugs I pointed out in that game weren't present in Windows 7. Can't wait to see what Windows 11 breaks. So we get into the game proper, which is a level select screen. Each act has 5 missions that the player has to only complete 4 of. This means that, inevitably, critical story information can't be in any of the individual missions, on the off chance that the player decides that is the one they aren't going to do, if you, for some reason, decide not to do all the missions, even though there's a mechanical incentive to do all of them. Each mission the player performs gives the player a point they can invest into their force powers, or, well, their optional force powers. Core force powers like push, pull, jump speed, and throw are story-gated. Kyle got most of his powers in a linear format, and while this new system can be interesting, it just means that players can get some absurdly powerful late-game powers by the 3rd mission. My favorite is Force Grip, which at level 3 allows free movement of the victim. Not only is it a flexible power, using people as meat shields or to set off mines, but you can also fling them, including high-level Force users. They'll resist most attempts or immediately push you to break the connection, but all you need is half a second of Force Grip to send a Sith warrior plummeting to their death. And there's other stuff. Mind Trick is very powerful, so is Lightning. Force Heal is insanely useful. Everything else is kind of a mixed bag, nice things to have but not really necessary. But you have a level 3 and level 2 power before you even get to Hoth. So if you thought Outcast was a power fantasy, Academy has it beat by a mile. You still get access to guns, but it's fairly limited depending on what act of the story you're in and doesn't carry over between missions, so there isn't really any resource management aspect to the game as a first-person shooter. It's very clear the focus shifted completely to the lightsaber combat, which isn't really that different. There's more animations, but they also took away first-person. The main thing is that in addition to the light, medium, and heavy combat styles, you now also have dual wielding and saber staves. I guess if all you wanted was more Outcast, then Academy delivers. There's also the little detail of Academy only having half the development time at only a year. The story is similarly simple. The fetishist Tavion from the first game did not in fact turn her life around, but actually decided that the disgrace of being spared would serve as motivation to try and be even more evil. With her now going around stealing dark angst energy with the big stick. I don't know how these people keep getting followers or budgets, but sure.
Who are you? Kyle Katarn. Motherfucker.
The thing about Academy's levels is that they're fairly linear. Maybe occasionally they'll have doors that give the map a circular shape. A lot of the weirder puzzle elements like the radio code room of hell from Outcast are gone, as the game is more intently focused on straightforward combat. I think the most interesting level of Act 1 would be on Blingeel, where we crash land on the planet while trying to rescue someone and have to dodge these sandworms. It's a super easy mission once you know what to do, but it isn't focused on combat, rather on level design. You have to find 4 parts, but can only carry 1 at a time, so you'll need to learn the safe ways to navigate around this area. The rest of Act 1 is mostly just fighting with the occasional duel. It's a good thing most of the high-tier Reborn warriors aren't being deployed on these missions while we're still relatively weak. It made more sense in Outcast due to the Reborn using the same life hack as Katarn to get his powers back at the Valley, so they're gradually growing in powers at the same rate as Kyle. Act 1 is spent chasing leads until Luke figures, hey, what about Hoth? That was in a Star Wars movie. So we head to Hoth, alone, not that it matters considering Jaden here is a one-man army. But it turns out after all this time, someone finally accessed the local database and discovered that Luke went to Dagobah, which I would rather not go back to after our experience in Battlefront 2, and thankfully we don't. Also, Rosh never came back from his mission, which kind of validates my theory that maybe this should have been a group assignment. Act 2. Pick a lightsaber combat style to learn and get some upgraded core powers. The way to go for single player is definitely the fast style, because most of the enemies you face won't have lightsabers and heavy's really only useful against saber wielders. This is where I think Academy's levels really start to shine. It's clear that designers wanted to work around the player's powers, namely force jump, and couldn't really do that until this point. Vanju 5 is a vehicle mission with these janky but cool speeders that have all the movement quirks of the game on steroids. Since these games are in id Tech 3, they of course inherited all the movement quirks, namely strafe jumping that gets increasingly more busted the higher your force power goes, and it's amazing. Seriously, I think Raven was actually using this engine quirk as part of their gameplay design. You also have Narkrita, the mission where you rescue some prisoners from a gambling ring where prisoners are forced to flee from a rancor. This is probably one of my favorite levels, because you'll keep retreading the same ground and the enemy actually accounts for this and starts escalating defenses in the bar. Killing the Rancor is also satisfying, if only slightly disappointing that another one gets brought out afterwards. And Asun, which is the level where you get captured and lose your lightsaber, so you have to rely on your guns and force powers. This level's good for breaking people out of their shell of relying on the lightsaber and actually engaging in the other mechanics this game has to offer, but on the flip side you have Krill Door, the gas giant level where you just run around planting beacons so Wedge can blow up parts of the station. There's nothing particularly clever about this level, I guess force pushing people off the ledge to horrible deaths.
As you enter these clouds, the light from the sun would slowly diminish and the temperature would start to heat up due to the ever-increasing pressures around you.
Hope you got force protection at some point because it's time for Vijun, with constant acid rain and 3 whole levels. So Luke learned from last time and decided to actually send the Masters with their students this time, with the best of the Academy in the form of Katarn heading to Vijun, where Darth Vader built himself a fortress and obviously had a lot of angst energy here. The first part is shooter heavy with Katarn on escort, then you start to get into duels with Katarn in the second part before you and Kyle get separated and have to do the third part alone.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. Where are you?
I'm not really sure. I'll have to catch up with you. Go on ahead without me.
Even as a kid, I thought this was a dumb moment because Kyle is shown as having mastered force jump to go insane distances and could probably climb the tower in less than a minute. The only way this would work is if the level established time-sensitive stakes early on, like maybe Tavion calls up and goes, "Hey, I have Rosh captured here, Katarn." After dueling about 1,000 reborn warriors, most of whom died from falling damage, it turns out Rosh is here and he's working for Tavion now. Rosh is literally only a threat if you're my second character who didn't use the lightsaber, and that's because of his backup dancers. Oh yeah, I did 2 playthroughs of Academy because I wanted to see how well it worked as a shooter, and, well, it's alright. But they were clearly working under the assumption that people just wouldn't do this.
Kyle is
Do you know why your weapon's not shooting? Maybe because you have run out of ammo.
What just happened?
You shot it all, pirate.
At first, you please me. You tease me, hurt me, but I was wrong. I was wrong. But I was wrong. I was wrong. Come to the dark side. You can't come to the dark side. You can't stop us. Come to the dark side. You can't come to the dark side.
Kyle.
Oh. Did you really think I would give up my new apprentice so easily?
This, Kyle, is the reason you probably should have urged patience and caught back up with Jaden before going in. Tavion destroys Jaden's lightsaber, so we're prompted to get a new one. You can stick with the single blade and get a third style, or get dual lightsabers or a staff. While you can technically go single blade with the latter two, it doesn't really work as well as purely having the single blade. Plus, honestly, I hate how many special snowflake lightsaber wielders there are now. I'm always going to appreciate the simplicity of a single blade wielder, but that's mostly because I'm more interested in the characters engaging in the fight rather than the spectacle of it. Like, my second favorite fight is Kylo Ren versus Finn, which was pretty much the only good fight in the sequels. Anyways, Act 3. Our core powers are maxed out and we're guaranteed to likely have some kind of overpowered ability at this point, so this is where the game really cuts loose. There's a giant unkillable rancor that gets set loose that you have to fight your way through people to escape from. This level's awesome because no matter how mobile you are, the threat of the rancor will manage to keep up. There's also a level where you fight Boba Fett, who cheats and is unbeatable until the end. Honestly, this probably should have been an Act 2 mission, because Act 3 Jaden can trounce Fett no problem. That's kind of the problem with Act 3. At this point, Jaden is an unstoppable monster of unparalleled power. Like, the mission at Biss on the Imperial ship is probably the best because Jaden's insane mobility is restricted by the tight corridors, but there isn't a single lightsaber duel on the ship, and these guys with the armor and the concussion cannons are just not enough of a threat. Act 2 was honestly the strongest because it sat in the middle of two extremes. So Kyle knows where Rosh is, and while it could be a trap, it could also be a great opportunity to finally put him down. Tasker 3 is a two-part level, and it's the conclusion of the shooter elements of the game, but it's an Imperial level, so it has that Kedjem problem of having little in the way of enemy variety. Like, the only thing going on here is getting constantly jumped by Reborn. So we find Rosh, who's being held hostage by Tavion's apprentice that we had met and fought back on Hoth. We're presented with a choice: kill Rosh or spare him. The difference is in the final two levels. Kyle's all like, "No, Jaden, killing people is wrong."
Don't! Mercy!
Identify yourself. Who are you?
Well, Felt's nothing.
If you spare Rosh, then Alora will end up cutting one of his arms off, presumably to put him out of commission, but he likely hasn't advanced since the June, so I'm not sure how much help he'd actually be to us. If you kill Rosh, he dies. A revolutionary, I know, but he deserves it, for treason is the greatest of sins. Also, Jaden decides to go to third option instead of aligning with Alora, and just fights her anyways. The problem with Alora as a boss fight is that she really isn't that different from any of the hundreds of other Reborn we fought up to this point, in that there's a lot of chance that comes down to who kills whom first. Plus, she isn't a character. The only thing that distinguishes her from anybody else in her order is she's the Twi'lek diversity hire. I mean, look at Dasan. He had the Reborn, but also the Shadow Troopers, the Doomgiver, Gallic Fayar, his apprentice Tavion, and established history with the Jedi Temple and Luke Skywalker, as well as his own personal philosophy about the role Force should serve in society. And he's considered a pretty simple character as far as Star Wars goes. Tavion just wants to resurrect the new Sith Daddy and resorts to stealing dark Force power from various places of historical significance. She probably only has an apprentice because she feels that's what she's supposed to do. Her character hasn't grown since Katarn spared her, and Alora as a result is just as bland. She's not a foil to Jaden as much as she is just another rung on the ladder. That said, Jaden's not a particularly standout character either. Pretty much the only moment of interest is his decision regarding Rosh, which either solidifies him as the ideal Jedi or turns his angst meter up to 11 as he decides to kill literally everybody at Korriban and then take over the Empire. Honestly, the dark side option's preferable because it makes Korriban more interesting. Normally, Jaden allies himself with the Jedi here and crushes the Sith, but as a Darksider, you go to war with everyone, a third party jumping into the middle of fights and still kicking ass. These levels are pure lightsaber combat. There's like one moment where you'll fight a squad of stormtroopers, but every other enemy has saber or force powers. If the player goes light side, they fight Tavion and then the resurrected spirit of some old guy, which is boring. If the player goes dark side, then they fight and kill Tavion and then fight Kyle motherfucking Katarn. Not only is Kyle different from most Force wielders you've fought, since he uses a hybrid of dark and light powers, he also has a ton of character behind him. I mean, hell, he was the protagonist of the last game and a master in this game, who personally went on several missions with us. Which I think stands to prove my point that character is a big part of boss fights. Tavion was boring because she was static and existed to resurrect Ragnos, and Ragnos is a non-existent character whose motivations or philosophy we similarly don't know. He's just evil, so go kill him. That's why the dark side is so much more interesting. It's intimately tied to character motivation. Jaden killed Rosh because of everything he did to her, and her beating Kyle is a sign of her growth as his apprentice. Granted, it's weird that Jaden decides to go control the Empire after leaving Kyle for dead. I'm not sure what her plans for the future were. Is that why they keep establishing their own form of governments to escape punishment for their short-term decision-making? Anyways, go play these games if you haven't, and even if you have, go try out being a gunslinger because it's a really fun playstyle. OpenJK will likely be more stable than the release version, and remember, realistic saber combat is for plebs who like spectacle. Many thanks to the patrons who support me, squishing 2 potential topics into a single video because honestly, Academy is just a standalone expansion. Patrons get to see the videos early and have their names in the credits because I guess people like that.